hit record. As a part of Earth Week, we're exploring topics around the theme, The Future is Now, which strives for a just and sustainable future for all. You can see our full schedule of events by visiting the link that I will post in the chat box. Actually, my colleague Theo has already done it, so thank you. My name's Amber Nicholson, and I'm from the Bellevue College Office of Sustainability. I will be moderating this event alongside my colleague Theo. Before we get started, we have a couple of things to go over. You are muted on joining, and we would like for you to stay on mute unless you're actively asking a question or responding to a prompt from our workshop leader, Mark. If you would like to keep your camera on, it does make for a more engaging session for everyone and helps us to build community. This event is also being recorded to post on our sustainability website at a later date. Throughout the session, please treat everyone with respect and share your comments and questions in the chat box. I will read those out for Mark as the workshop progresses. We will open it for Q&A at the end, where you can either unmute yourself or have us read out your question. For the best Zoom experience, I recommend you click the speaker view button in the top right corner of your screen, which will make sure that the workshop is centered for you. Lastly, we pause to acknowledge that Bellevue College resides on the traditional and occupied land of the Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future, that includes but is not limited to Snoqualmie, Suquamish, Duwamish, Nisqually, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. We honor their connection to the region, pay respect to Coast Salish elders past and present, and stand in solidarity with their struggles with continued systemic oppression. We commit to care for the land and water and center equity at the core of our unlearning. Now let me take a quick moment to introduce our workshop leader, Mark. Mark Storey completed his college work at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Washington in Seattle. He has taught philosophy classes at Bellevue College since 1990, with special interests in social philosophy, aesthetics, and Eastern philosophy. His hobbies include kayaking, cooking, and naturist research. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Amber. And that pretty much makes me the old goat in our department, which means I get to have some fun doing things like adding cooking into philosophy occasionally. We're going to do a vegan version of paella, and it's going to be in kind of real time. So once I get started, I won't be pulling batches halfway cooked out of the oven somewhere. So you'll see, you can get this whole thing cooked in well under an hour. One thing you do want to do is make sure all your vegetables and ingredients are chopped up ahead of time. That's pretty much going to be true of any cooking you like doing. I've been cooking paella for about 10 years. My wife kind of suckered me into a workshop at a grocery store years and years ago. Turned out I really liked it. She thought it would be a great thing for me to get into paella. There's so many great ingredients, so many great tools involved. I got hooked and haven't looked back. I'll talk more about paella and the tools and ingredients when we have these little pause times. Let me go ahead and get started. Get the things, get my paella grill going. This is a paella grill. I believe you can see it. It's a grill made simply for paella. It's worth nothing for anything else. Somehow we'll have 3 rings. So what it does, it provides a nice even heat, a nice gentle heat underneath the pan. I'm going to be using a paella pan. I'll talk about paella pans a bit more in a second. I want to get it started. And no matter what paella you make, you're going to start off pretty much the same way. You're going to have a paella pan, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Please use olive oil. Don't use anything other than olive oil. You don't need extra virgin. It makes no sense. You're going to cook the oil here pretty soon. So pure oil is perfectly fine. It's a slightly lower grade, but it works better for cooking like this. And use a wonderfully ungodly amount, about a half a cup. I want to get this heated up a little bit. Wedge there. Let the oil heat up a little bit. I put in about a half a cup. Pure olive oil, as I say, you really don't need more expensive kind. My wife's pointing at something.
You're going to set your apron on.
Oh, yes. I'm going to set my apron on fire. That has actually happened. Once the oil gets started, we put in the rice. Now, you're not going to be able to see a huge difference here. But this is a rice from Spain. It's loosely called paella rice. It's the most absorbent rice in the world. What they want is a short grain rice that absorbs like crazy, because the rice doesn't taste like anything, but it's going to absorb all the really great flavors we're going to put in there. So you can use other rices, but you really want to try to find a paella rice. around the Seattle area, you're going to find bags that look something like this. It'll say paella rice, bomba rice. There's 2 or 3 varieties, but it gets something that looks like that says paella. It costs a bit more, yes, but it works better, and it's an amazing sponge. So we're going to start off by actually cooking up the onions. Just chopped up onions. And I would suggest Spanish yellow onions. I mean, I guess you could use sweet onion. Theoretically, you could use a red onion, but paella is from Spain, so you really want to have Spanish onion. Trying to just get this level. I'm going to let those onions cook a while. You can't overcook them. Virtually impossible. So just let them cook. Sometimes as much as 10 minutes if you have a low heat. We're not going to take that much time. As far as the heat goes, paella it's a Spanish dish. It's got a long history. Persia is a place like Persia, China, and there's others that have a rich rice history. Persian rice is just absolutely fantastic. Anyway, from Persia, the Moors through North Africa brought it up into Spain centuries ago. The Romans produced these flat pans, which they call paellas. And in Spain, they started kind of combining this Persian rice with rice from Persia in these flat pans, and developed their own little cooking style, which is kind of unique these days. The pans themselves, there's different sizes. You can kind of see there'll be these little dimples in them. Now these are going to be carbon steel pans, which I can bring it up. Which, fortunately, these are actually some of the least expensive ones, and they're also the best ones. They produce the best paella, the most authentic paella. They need to be kind of thin, because what we're going to do when we're cooking it is change the heat fairly rapidly. So a thick, heavy pan, like a cast iron pan, just isn't going to work very well. There's slightly different variants of pans. I've got a number of them for different purposes. I'm just cooking these onions. I don't need them browned. I just want them really super soft, almost slightly obliterated. This is a stainless steel paella pan. Very easy to clean. I don't have to worry about seasoning it like I would the carbon steel. The seasoning and the patina that develops in the carbon steel produces a little extra taste in the paella that's kind of nice. But these are good because they're easy to clean. And I've got a glass flat top stove, which I'm not really fond of. So I needed something with a perfectly flat bottom. These are actually slightly curved, so the oil dips down to the bottom. The little dimples in there help keep the curve of the pan, and they also help kind of distribute the oil a bit. But this is good if I want to make a dessert paella. And there are a number of sweet paellas you can make for dessert. You don't want any patina flavor in there. And this thing's super easy to clean, and it's smaller, so it fits on my stove. There's other styles. This is another glass top paella pan. It's carbon steel, I believe, but I don't use this one too much. I started using this for camping, and then I got this one. If it's just my wife and I camping, whether we're out kayaking or out on some campground, this thing is super easy to clean. It's an cheapo enamel kayak or paella pan. Super easy to clean, and it makes enough for 2 people if we're not too hungry. My wife and I are somewhat gluttonous, so we'll actually eat most of this today. But there's different kinds of pans. If you were to get one in only one pan, and you want to try to cook for 4 to 6 people, like this size here would be good, about an 18-incher from side to side. This is a 23-incher. Anything bigger than this, you're going to start spending billions of dollars because they need to be handmade and shipped from far too long of a distance. Anything up to about 23 inches, they're going to be about 30 to 50 bucks, which isn't terribly expensive for cookware. The onions are cooked. Now I've got some vegetables to put in. I'm going to put in the stuff that will take the longest to cook. And this is all going to happen fairly quickly.
Show off your vegetables.
These are going to be Anaheim peppers, just chopped up. Some people like using green bell, but they tend to mush out a little bit. Some people don't like green bell. Anaheims are just barely, slightly hotter than a green bell. I mean, you really can't even tell it. They're not spicy at all. They're not going to take over the flavor. They're about as, I think bells have a 0 or a 1 on a scale. These things, I think, have 1,000 on that pepper hot scale. But keep in mind, the top pepper in the world right now is 2.25 million. So that's, we're talking way, way down low. So I'm just going to cook them just long enough just to kind of heat up. And there's going to be plenty of time to cook with them. Pine nuts, about 4 tablespoons in there. That's going to give a nice crunch, a little bit of texture to the paella. An ungodly amount of garlic. You got to like garlic. Go fresh if you can. And just, let's get that in there just a little bit. In fact, I don't want to burn the garlic, so I'm going to go ahead and put the spinach in. This is about 5 cups of baby spinach. You buy one of those boxes of spinach you find in a supermarket these days, it's usually just exactly the right amount. A little bit more is fine, a little bit less is fine. The amount doesn't really matter too much. It's all going to kind of cook down. And you can see why this is being called a green paella, or Paella Verde. I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit. As I say, paella comes from Spain, and it's kind of a farmer dish, if you will. Just imagine some farmers. These guys are going out in the fields. Probably mom at home is going to just give them whatever vegetables they have left over from the last couple of meals. They get out there and they're cooking over a campfire. At first, the campfire is pretty high. Maybe it's got some orange branches in it, so it gives a nice aromatic flavor to the whole thing. But the fire starts off pretty hot. So the paella starts off hot. You're heating the onions hot. You're cooking the stuff initially fairly hot. But as a campfire would slowly get lower, so too with this. And it's going to be lowering the temperature down a bit by bit throughout the next half hour or so. And then what the Spaniards would do when they're cooking this out in the fields, when the paella is almost done, they pull it off this like metal tripod they have, pick the tripod away, take the whole pan and throw it right on the coals. So it actually cooks, like burns the heck out of 1 grain's worth of rice at the very bottom of the pan. Then they pull the pan off and at that point can eat it. And since they're dealing with a very thin metal pan, the pan gets hot fast, but then it cools down really fast. If you try doing something like that with a cast iron pan, it's going to get heat up, stay hot, and you'll never cool it down, and everything burns into a mess. You pretty much need to have some kind of thin metal pan for this kind of dish. Now, apparently, this was being made in Spain for centuries, from the time of the Moors, if you will. But the pans that came from Rome weren't the best shape. It wasn't until the 19th century that the technology in Spain developed so that people could actually produce these pans in kind of a mass amount so that everybody could have them without it costing a lot. And so it's really only the 19th century that paella starts getting fairly popular. I mean, there's written record of it in the 1700s, but you don't really find a lot of talk about it until the 1900s. World War II happens and messes the heck up out of Spain. After World War II, Spain, like many countries, France, Italy, a number of others, started relying on their tourist industry, developing some of these great seaside areas. So tourists started coming to Spain after World War II. They discovered paella and thought, this is the coolest thing in the world. This is so Spanish. And it became kind of a, since then, kind of like Spain's official dish, if you will. It's a national dish. So ever since then, it's, from what I hear, you can't go to Spain without finding paella because everybody wants to give it a try. But we can make it really easily here. As far as what you want to cook it on, I went ahead and bought myself a paella grill because I make this a lot. And I find, and my students in class can verify this, I'm a complete dork. I mean, I have virtually no social skills that I'm aware of, and frankly, can't get invited to parties to save my life. The only way I go to parties is because my wife is very popular. They invite her and say, you can bring what's his name if you want. As soon as I started being able to make paella and bring this little apparatus to potlucks, people thought it was cool. For like 15 minutes, everybody comes by and says, what are you doing? And I can explain, I'm making paella. And for 15 minutes, I'm fairly popular until I serve it, and I become even more popular, and then I get invited to potlucks. So it's worth it to me to actually have this thing so I can carry it around. Another good cooking mechanism are those round Weber kettle grills. They have the coals have a really nice soft heat, and coals tend to just naturally get cooler and cooler and cooler. So it's actually as authentic a fire as you could have. Those round coal or charcoal grills that Weber makes, but basically any campground grill that is big enough to hold a pan will work. Anything with fire. Stoves aren't a problem. If you got a big burner on your stove, that makes it really nice and easy for you. I don't. I've got 4 with one a little bit bigger. So what I have to do is heat up 3 grills, or 3 whatever those things are, and burners, and then just kind of move the pan around on them. It's a little awkward, but it works, and the paella really doesn't know the difference. It all kind of works out okay. So on virtually any kind of stove you have at home, you should be able to do this. If you've got some kind of barbecue grill set up, you just need something that can fit this whole pan. The Weber works really well, but anything with a good-sized grill can work fine. Gas or charcoal. Okay, this is all looking very cooked. It's going quite nicely. We're also going to put in some green olives. Oh, I can bring this up here. Just basic green olives with pimentos, these small kind. So drain the jar. And let's get those in there. We'll let those cook just for a second. The order is not really critical here with this green paella. It just gets stuff in there. You want to do the onions first, definitely. But after that, just kind of be aware how fast things cook and put in the slow cooking things first and the fast cooking things towards the end. The olives, doesn't matter. If you cook them a minute, 10 minutes, the spinach is going to be good however long you cook it. I don't think you can overcook or undercook spinach. It'll be okay raw, be okay cooked heavily. This is all looking really good here. So now's the time to throw in some rice. There are vicious battles amongst the paella people on when to do this. There are some people who say it needs to be put in before you put in the broth. There's people who say, no, put the broth in first and then put in the rice. I found it works fine both ways. I kind of like the theory of putting the rice in first because it allows the rice to kind of soak up some oil without starting to cook. It's the water in the broth that's going to start the cooking process. I can throw oil on the rice and it's not really going to start. But once it gets started, it's like 18, 20 minutes after that, it wants to be done. It's kind of picky rice, fine. So I'm just stirring it around, not letting it burn. I have the broth right now heating up on my stove. I could put cold broth in here, but then the extra minutes it would take to boil the broth, get it hot, is going to throw the whole thing off. So I put in nearly boiling temperature broth in here, and I know 18, 20 minutes later, it's all going to be done and be fine. The broth has some cumin in it. I put in some fresh parsley. I put in saffron. As far as saffron goes, you're not going to see much by having me bring this up. As far as the saffron goes, this is the expensive stuff. In ancient Rome, saffron cost more by its weight than gold did. And it's maybe almost that true today. It's definitely the most expensive herb spice in the world. If you get it, you definitely want to get real stuff and not fake stuff. There are some culinary cultures that use what they call as saffron, but it's not really saffron. It's just the stamen from some other flower. It colors the food yellow, but it doesn't really impart any flavor. Saffron provides a really unique background flavor that makes paella distinctive. So I would say paella, to be picky and technical here, needs to be cooked in a paella pan with paella rice and a little bit of saffron. You can do anything else after that, whatever vegetables, meats. You don't have to put any vegetables and meats in it. It's still going to be an okay paella. So if you're buying saffron, make sure.
Yeah, can you take some out
So
and show
small.
us? Yeah,
How about
exactly.
to show this? I
Higher,
don't know if can you see this?
higher.
Higher? Oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
there you go.
They're the flower stamens of a particular flower called a crocus. There's only one variety of crocus. If you try growing them here, in the Seattle area, squirrels will eat them and drive you crazy. So you're probably going to have to buy this stuff. Kathy, could you get that off? Literally, people are picking these things by hand and then drying them out. So what you want to do is find some saffron that has a little orange tip. It'll be kind of reddish with a little orange, almost yellowish tip. There is no way anybody is going to hand paint every single one of these stamens. You know those are authentic. If they're all solid red, it's probably fake. If you have powdered saffron, that can be good, or it might not be. It just depends on if it's authentic or not. But you definitely want some saffron. Most amazing deals I've seen were at Costco. This is just the broth. There's nothing really to look at. I'm pouring it in now. Why don't you bring Kathy, I will have you bring the computer over so people can see what it looks like at this point. I poured the broth in. I kind of stirred the rice around a little to even it out. So there's an even batch of, there's even rice all over. It's boiling pretty hard now. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. But that's looking okay. That should cook about 18 minutes. What I'm going to do, because I've got this particular kind of grill, you'll kind of see there's these three lines. That's where the grill is underneath. Well, I'm just going to turn this every now and then, just so it gets an even, nice even cook. Okay, Kathy, thank you. My wife who's helping me out. Okay, am I back to being okay? Okay. This rice does not like to be played with, and it doesn't want a lid. Remember when I bought my first paella pan, I asked the person who sold it to me, where's the lid? And he said, rats, you must not have one. So I felt a little bit bummed out. Turns out, no, you don't use lids on paella pans. No paella pan has a lid. It likes cooking a certain way. It likes cooking out in the open air, no lid, and it doesn't want to be stirred. Now, you can mess with it a little bit right at the beginning, but after that, just leave her alone. Depending on what kind of paella you make, if you want to put some other kinds of things, sometimes I put frozen peas on top or shrimp. You can put those in on top later on, maybe mash them down a little bit. But we're just going to let this cook. And I'm going to slowly turn the heat down because I don't want all the broth to simply evaporate before the rice is cooked. I want to time it so that the rice cooks about the time all the broth is evaporated. 18-20 minutes will do the job, whether you're making a small paella or a big one. If you're cooking inside your house, you can cook most of it until it's almost done. And then if your pan fits in your oven, just stick it in the oven at 350 for 5-10 minutes. And you won't get that crust on the bottom, called the succarat, but it'll taste wonderful, and you'll have a nice paella that each grain is individual but fully cooked. What we're going to do is I'm just going to take a dish towel, something like this, try to get one of them, filter five for my wife. Rinse it off just a little bit, get a little bit damp in your kitchen sink, so it's a little bit damp. Then when I'm done, I'm going to take this off and cover the whole thing, not burning the towel, and let that sit for 5 minutes. And what that's going to do is allow the heat of the rice to soak up the last little bit of moisture, get it soaked into the rice. That will be part of what we're going to do, so we'll just go until this is actually done. Okay. I teach philosophy at Bellevue College, and I love doing that. I love being able to play with my own mind and other people's minds. Get to learn from people, they get to learn from me maybe. But when I was in college, particularly as a grad student, I was interested in environmental ethics. And so I taught environmental ethics a number of times at their experimental college. It seemed to me I could take almost any grad class in philosophy and somehow turn it into an environmental ethics class. I was interested in that stuff and remain interested. I wish BC was a little more gung-ho about it. We used to have an environmental ethics class, and students just apparently lost interest. We had a really good instructor too, better than I would even do. That was pretty good. But I spent a lot of time trying to look at the arguments for and against vegetarianism. And this is just my slant. Not push it on anybody, but this is kind of the way where I've kind of come on this thing. I haven't really found any argument that makes me think I have a moral obligation to never eat an animal. I know there's a lot of arguments out there. There's certainly arguments that push me in that direction. But when I started looking at them critically, they don't seem to quite put me over the edge where I think I really have a moral obligation not to. That said, I'm aware that you take 10 acres of ground and devote it to raising cattle, or 10 acres of ground and devote it to raising vegetables, you're going to produce far less pollution on everybody else nearby with a vegetable farm. And the amount of protein and actual kind of stuff you need for your body is going to be hugely greater out of the vegetables you get out of those 10 acres than you will out of the cattle out of those 10 acres. So there certainly seems to be kind of practical health and environmental reasons for doing this. But I got to say, even for me, that didn't quite tell me, okay, I cannot eat a cheeseburger. And yet I find myself leaning in a certain direction, kind of leaning towards being a little more friendly to the earth and leaning towards more of a plant-based diet. And I look back at the arguments I've studied as a philosopher and the other things I've experienced, and it really wasn't the arguments I knew as a philosopher. I like philosophy, and I think it can tell us a lot of things. But what I found was two things about vegetarianism that impacted me. The first thing was I would run across certain individuals who are just, in my mind, superior human beings. Every time I'd be near them, even if I didn't really know who they were personally, when I get close to them, I would think somehow I want to be like that person. And there's one or two people at BC, one's not there anymore, he retired. One of them's still working there, by the way. I won't tell you who he is. But I'm just really impressed with these guys. And they never pushed their vegetarian diet on me. They just are good people. And I know they're eating the way they're eating because that's part of their good life. So somehow, that's not an argument. And it doesn't tell me I have a moral obligation not to eat meat. But somehow, that's the kind of person I want to become. That's a huge philosophical topic, kind of grounded in something like an Aristotelian virtue ethics. I want to be a certain kind of person rather than not doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and definitely always doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's more of a character-based kind of ethic than a rule-based ethic. There's no conflict there. But I found that has actually impacted my diet more than anything else other than the second thing, which is there's a lot of really good tasting vegetarian dishes. I mean, I don't use vegetarian dishes to supper to make up for meat. I do it because they taste good. I'm reducing the heat because this seems to be cooking very fast.
I think this would be a good time. I think we have a question.
Okay.
If you'd like to unmute yourself, go for it.
Hi, so I have a question. So you often say vegetarianism. So are you vegetarian or vegan? And also, do you see a problem?
No, I'm actually a flaming omnivore. If anything sits near me long enough, there's a good chance I'll eat it. But I find myself leaning towards vegetarianism, not veganism.
Okay.
I know there's ways of really hurting and messing with animals to get cheeses and milks. So my wife and I tend to buy stuff that we hope is avoiding that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, even the fact that I am hesitant in responding indicates that I think somehow I would like to be moving more in that direction.
Yeah.
This is a vegan dish.
Yeah.
My mother is a flaming carnivore when she was alive, and I made her a million different kinds of paellas. This was her favorite because she thought it tasted the best.
Wow.
So I'm thinking a lot of people just don't know that vegetables can really taste good and can do the job for us.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Am I answering your question?
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to know. 'Cause I was vegan for 2 years. I'm not anymore, but and I know there was a big argument against dairy. So I was just wondering, if you are vegan.
No, I'm not. I actually have more experience with being raw vegan because some of my friends were raw vegan, and I had to learn how to cook for them.
Oh my
And
God.
sometimes I had a group come from LA to stay at my house. I was producing these plays at the Seattle Fringe
Wow.
Festival. And I said, I'll fix you guys food. Well, it turns out 2 or 3 of them were raw vegan. One was a vegan and one was a carnivore and wanted nothing but cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
That was an interesting week. But that, I couldn't quite wrap my brain around the arguments for being a raw vegan.
Yeah.
For being a vegan, I can understand it.
Pretty intense.
I'm looking at this, I'm smelling this, it's cooking, but I think it needs more liquid. So let me just show you what to do if you find you need a little more liquid. I'll be right back. Okay, just got some hot water. You can kind of sprinkle some water in here. I'm using my fingers because I want it to be kind of spread around and not all be blocked up into one spot. Yeah. And I'm just looking at it and I don't want it to burn, but I know it's not ready. We haven't gone 18 minutes yet. So when we get close to 18 minutes, I'll be able to taste some of the rice. Were there other questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
So how could you tell it needed more water?
What I just put in was the hottest water I could get out of the sink and not burn my hand. Because I don't want it cold because that would cool everything down. But I just was feeling that, sensing it was cooking too fast. It's kind of a warm day. Fine when the day's warm, the stuff cooks faster. When it's cold and windy, it cooks slower. I mean, that's kind of a subtlety, but it's real as I've learned. So sometimes a proportion of broth to rice that I've used for a long, long time just doesn't work that day. So you might want to add a little bit of broth or a little bit of water. And it never hurts to add water. I just put in a little bit. It's going to cook off here pretty fast without burning the rice. Okay. Some people ask about where to get this kind of stuff. I'm not pushing any particular company, but I can tell you these guys will sell you incredibly priced foods. If you want to actually find where someone could spend $1,400 on one ham, these guys will sell it to you. I wouldn't do that. But they will sell the pans at a reasonable price. And everything I've bought from them has actually gotten to me. There's probably other companies that sell Spanish cookware. This just happens to be the biggest one online, and they seem to be legit. There's a million books on paella, on making paella. The one that I tend to go to time and again because the recipes are pretty simple, but close to being authentic, is this one, this Paella. If you want to buy a book, I've liked this one. This recipe kind of originally came from here. It's been modified a bunch of times by me, but I can suggest that. I'm not messing with the paella at all. I'm smelling just to see if it's burning. It's not.
There's another question in the chat, whether this is served with tortillas or bread or anything like that.
Say that again, please.
There's a question in the chat as to whether or not this is served with tortillas or bread.
This is from Spain, so it would be bread. You'll find tortillas more in Central America, Mexico, South America, perhaps. But I don't think they're gonna have tortilla. The tortilla they have in Spain is a completely different dish. It's a potato egg thing. Lots of olive oil all fried together for breakfast. It's one of my favorite breakfasts. But what I would eat with this, well, what I would like with this, I like a salad with it, but they didn't do a lot of salads in Spain. The way they would serve this is traditionally you would take the pan and put it right on the table. You don't put it on plates. And everybody has a wooden fork or a wooden spoon, and they kind of imagine their own triangle and kind of a triangle. And then they eat it right together. It's a very communal kind of food. Again, imagine a bunch of guys telling jokes. They're tired from working all day on the farm. They're way out in the fields. And they're just sitting on their haunches and with this thing sitting on the ground, eating together. So there's actually kind of a tradition about this. What do you have with it? Yeah, you could have, I like salads, and I like a nice crusty, kind of a French style bread. It's kind of hard to find in the Seattle area. But if you could find a French bread you like, that would work well. To drink with it, I guess no one's going to think ill of you if you drink the sangria, but frankly, a fruity red wine is the best thing. That's more traditional, and in my opinion, tastes the best. I'm not talking a sweet wine, but Beaujolais. No, you can Burgundy would be a little strong for this, but some kind of light red wine. They don't do a lot of whites. You would think this would be a white wine. And I don't know, I guess you could have a white wine with a paella. You do whatever you want. But in terms of tradition, a nice red wine. In Spain, an apple cider would also work. If you don't like alcohol, there's plenty of good non-alcoholic ciders. The cider is a big thing in Spain, and that would be very normal to have that. Okay.
Mark, can you tilt the camera down when you get a second so we can see the paella again? There we go. Perfect.
I suggest
Thank you.
lemon as something to put on top. You want to keep it vegan. Lemon's still fine. I have never found a paella that wasn't helped by a lemon. Just squirt it all over everything. It just makes it amazingly better. If you want to go vegetarian, and the vegan thing isn't quite as important, I would sprinkle up some manchego cheese right at the end. It's a Spanish hard cheese. It's kind of like Parmesan, just cooler, because it's from Spain. Put some manchego cheese. Let it sit there underneath the towel. And by the time you take that towel off 5 minutes from now, that cheese is going to melt it in there, but you just got to stir it up. Oh my God, it's good. My wife and I are going to have this just as is here today, and we're going to love it as is. I think this is going to be about done, and there's really nothing to do but to put this towel over it and let it sit for a few minutes. I'm just going to dig in just a little bit. Yeah, it all looks perfectly done. I'm going to turn the heat off. I'm not going to worry about the sucarat here. A lot of paellas want to have, a lot of people want to have some Spanish paprika in it. This does not have paprika in it. Spanish paprika is a different pepper than the Hungarian paprika we normally have. But most people are going to associate paella with kind of a surf and turf approach, your basic tourist paella. Maybe some shrimp, maybe some shellfish, some chicken, and some sausage, some Spanish chorizo, which is nothing at all like Mexican chorizo. It's a different kind, it's a paprika-based one. You don't find a lot of this in Spain from right here. The original paella was from Valencia in eastern Spain, and that used the kind of ingredients they had available. Chicken, rabbit, land snails, these long green beans, and they would just mix all that together in the paella, and they just loved that. But you go on the coast of Spain, you'll find seafood paella. You go inland, you might find some other paella. I've tried making my own. One failure was for me to make an Argentinian paella. I looked at the meats they did like in Argentina, and tons of them. And I tried putting all that in there, and I just did not like it. Way too heavy. I'm never going to do that again. I have a Persian friend. We talk cooking a lot. And so I thought about making a Persian pie. Asked them what kind of vegetables they use. They're not going to use pork, of course, so I threw in a little bit of lamb. And had far more dill and mint in it than the spinach and the herbs I use here. That came out really good. So my point is, as long as you're using the paella rice, you're cooking in olive oil, you're probably going to want onion in there. Not always, probably. You can do any darn thing you want. It's authentic paella. It's really more the cooking style. The pan is called a paella. The dish is called a paella. If you like making paella, you be a paellero or a paellera, so soy paellero. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. So I'm going to stop there. Are there any last questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself or throw it in the chat.
So you do cook this with meat sometimes too. Like, do you add anything? I guess you said you can use like dill and mint instead of spinach. Yeah.
Like with the Persian one, I used a great amount of dill. Persian cooking has taught me that you can use like a bucket of dill and it's okay. I was afraid to use that much, but use a lot of dill, a lot of mint. I can't think of anything you can't put in there if you like it, because the rice is so neutral. It's you are infusing the rice with flavors of your choice. You're probably going to have the onion. I like a lot of peppers in it. So, but I like Anaheims because they cook nicer. The Anaheims that are going to be in there now aren't going to be all mushed out the way a green bell would be. But
Yeah.
there's also these peppers from Spain, these red peppers. They have a lot of flavor. They come jarred, unless you can find some fresh, I guess. And that oftentimes makes for wonderful things. But the sky's the limit.
Can you use like tomatoes? Is
Oh
that?
yeah, oh yeah. Oh,
Oh.
yeah. Most paellas. Oh God, I love this. Most paellas actually have a base. I cook onion,
Yeah.
obliterate that, and then I throw in some flat leaf parsley,
Mm.
a good handful, big handful, and then a can of fire roasted tomatoes. Better yet, get those beefsteak tomatoes, the big ones, slice them in half, and then just grate them. They're super easy to grate because the skin protects your hand. And you
Yeah.
get this big mush of tomato. You throw that in there, and then
Wow.
you obliterate it. It needs to turn a dark red, which it will. And the longer you cook it on a low heat, it becomes just an amazing condiment. And you can, if you make too much, you can always put it in a jar and use it for other dishes. But then
Mhm.
that becomes my base. And
Yeah.
that paella looks like that classic red kind of paella that people expect to see out of.
No. Yeah. No sugar, no salt.
No sugar
Okay.
that I'm aware of, unless I'm doing some kind of dessert paella that's supposed to be
Mm.
sweet. You really don't want to worry about salt too much. With the broth, usually there's salt in there. If you want to salt it, you can, but really, I don't salt my paellas until it's on the table.
Okay.
Somehow, with all the, particularly if you're using meats, you're going to find some salts coming out of there.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
this, because this is a vegetarian paella and we're not putting cheese in this one, it may need a little bit. My wife and I don't do much in the way of salt, but that's just because we're old and that's us.
Okay. Yeah. So I use like avocado oil. Can you use that, or do you prefer olive oil?
Well, you don't need the high heat point, so don't worry about that. You
Mm, I
really
see.
want it to be olive oil.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, to get the taste of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Spanish cooking just thrives on olive oil. And you want the
Mm,
pure, the cheap stuff.
okay.
The expensive extra virgin isn't going to do you any good. It's all going to break down anyway as soon as you heat it
Yeah.
up. Extra virgin is good for salads where you're sprinkling it on raw things.
Hmm.
But just find yourself a big old jug of pure olive oil.
Okay.
I would hate to have you miss the flavor of olive oil in a paella.
I use olive oil.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks so much. It was such a great,
Very good.
talk. I'm gonna cook that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat from April. It says, what if you don't want to buy the fancy paella pan? What would be a cheaper alternative that could work?
You can do it. In fact, the first 2 or 3 times I made paella, I didn't know I was supposed to use a paella pan, and I used a ceramic Dutch oven with a lid. So it was completely alien to paella, and yet it came out really, really tasty. But if you want to try a paella thing without actually buying a pan, find yourself, try to stay away from the cast iron pan. If you've got some stainless steel saute pan, fine. If you got like a basic stainless steel frying pan, you can use, what am I trying to say? Kind of pans that don't have friction. What am I saying? The kind of pans where non-stick pans. You can use a non-stick pan, but it has problems of flaking off occasionally and whatnot. If I was in your shoes, I'd just go ahead and try as wide, as shallow a steel pan as you got. It'll work.
Thank you. Another question is, what local stores carry the paella rice that you buy?
Pretty much all of them I've run across. Certainly, I go to Central Market because that's where I live, and I live near that here at Shoreline. I want to say good grocery store, but then again, I define a good grocery store as those who provide me paella ingredients. Most grocery stores will have them. I wouldn't buy it online. That's going to cost you way too much. The rice is going to be a little bit more expensive, yes, because it is the most absorbent rice in the world. You'll find more than one kind that's good enough for paella. I think Safeway should have them. Certainly your Whole Foods. I'll bet money that any of the PCCs will have them. My wife's nodding yes. Not hard to find. The saffron's easy to find, although the sticker shock will knock you for a loop. Keep in mind you only use a little bit. When I talk about a pinch for a paella this big, I'm using maybe 15 threads. That's just an itty bitty pinch. So you buy a little jar, it may look real expensive, but that can last you months. And as far as the pan, the kitchen stores are going, and Seattle had one of the country's best Spanish stores right below Pike Street Market. They went out of business. At least that store did. It was still in business, but now you got to use them, go online to get the stuff. But I've had good luck buying these things online. Just buy an authentic one. You'll find 2 red handles on the side, probably carbon steel. It's just a basic traditional paella pan, and that'll also be one of the cheaper ones, but it'll also be one of the better ones.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to unmute or post in chat. Mark, maybe we could get one more zoom in of the final product.
Okay, this is kind of how it would look. There we go, something like that. So it should have kind of a, what almost looks like a soft crust on top, a moist crust. Everything's looking pretty cooked to me. I dug down below a little bit and saw that, you know, all the moisture had been evaporated. I would like it to look maybe a little moister. I think maybe I could put more liquid in it next time, or I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it looks fine. I'm looking forward to eating it. And it's pretty fail safe.
Looks great.
Looks good.
I'm hungry now.
Yeah, well, that's what we'll be eating here in about 10 minutes.
Perfect. Any final opportunity for question? Other people are saying it looks great too. Awesome.
I have a
Well,
question quickly. Does saffron lose its potency, I guess? I had a friend who brought me back a little jar of saffron, I think 2 years ago, and I've never cooked with it.
I've used saffron that's 2 years old and haven't found a problem with it. It's very dry, so it's probably going to be pretty okay for quite a while. Like with any herb or seasoning, you would like to use it within a year. But I cooked some paella for some friends down in LA, and kind of by way of thank you, they sent me these 2 big jars of saffron, which I thought was amazing. I've been living off that saffron for well over 2 years now. I'm just now down to the nubs with it. I definitely wouldn't throw it out, but I'd also encourage you to open it up and use it on some things. You can just, if you just cook normal white rice in your pan or your rice cooker or whatnot, just throw a few strands of saffron in it. You're not making paella, but the saffron will make your rice dish taste wonderful. It's great in all kinds of stews. It's the Persians use it in all their kourishes, their stews, and it's just a great background flavor. And you don't need much. Just
Great. Well, now I have a recipe for it, so thank you.
All right.
yeah, and
Okay.
I will send out the recipe to everyone that participate today. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on this wonderful Earth Day for this great vegan recipe. And let's give a quick round of applause for Mark. You can do a reaction or something. But thank you, Mark, for joining us. And a reminder to all attendees that there's more Earth Week events tomorrow. We're doing a gardening workshop and a home waste audit workshop tomorrow. So please join us.
Thank you.
Thanks.